Jonathan.
Hi Jay, how you going?
Yeah, good. You can hear me well. All good.
Yes.
So welcome to the Talent Channel podcast with myself. This is actually the second episode. We've taken a bit of a hiatus over the crazy period, the Christmas and New Year period, but now we're back with a bang, 2025, and we're very happy to have you, Jonathan Mamaril. I'll let you introduce yourself as my second guest for the Talent Channel podcast. So who's Jonathan? I must say I've been working with you for quite a while now, doing a lot of collaboration work in the HR space and the businesses. And always a pleasure to work with you, Jonathan. But today we're going to turn the mirror on you a bit. So I hope you don't feel a bit out of place, because this is going to be you on the other side of the table, because you run a podcast called the HR Engage, don't you?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
I've got the HR Engage podcast, and it's actually a little bit odd to be on the other side of the table.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to it, Jay.
Yes, so let's get into it. So who's Jonathan Mamaril? How do you introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, first of all, of course, I'm your number two episode, so that's a great honor, of course. So I'd love to be that number two guest. I'm a director here at South Geldard Lawyers. I head the employment law team. As you said, I'm also a host of the HR Engage podcast, and basically, in particular, I help a lot of HR teams and HR managers deal with workplace law and employment law issues. Workplace bullying, sexual harassment, general protections, termination employment contracts, that sort of thing, those sort of issues. And in particular, I also work with local councils and government as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I always know you as an excellent HR lawyer, and it's very rare nowadays to have people like yourself who understand, obviously, very good at the HR space, as well as the legal aspect of things. With the new legislations always changing, it's always tricky, So you've always been one of the excellent lawyers out there, from my point of view. What I would like to know, though, is how did you get there in terms of where you are today?
Yeah, great question. It's been a bit of a journey for me. So I started out of law school. I went to university, studied law and politics. I went into a trade union. So one of my mentors suggested that I work at a trade union. So I initially, Jay, I actually didn't want to work at a law firm. I didn't want to be a lawyer. I did the law degree and all those types of things, but law was not really where I wanted to go. And so I went and worked for a trade union as a suggestion from my mentor. I did a year working with probably the lowest paid workers. So thinking hospitality, security, childcare workers. And my job was to essentially talk to them about membership. And so I developed very certain types of skills. You could probably call them more like sort of sales or business development skills. And just be able to connect with people in particular, especially those who, potentially don't really have a lot of a say usually. After about a year, I was sent off to work at a union affiliated law firm, where that's where my legal career really started. After a couple of years, I worked for some really preeminent lawyers, some who are now judges, barristers, commissioners, even in the Fair Work Commission, politicians, and I then went back to the union, worked in-house in the industrial relations team, and then eventually went into private practice. And now, currently, head the employment law team here at South Geldard Lawyers. So it's been an amazing
Yeah.
journey. Of had over 16 years post-admission experience. So it's been quite a while. It's always been in employment law. Like I did a little bit of other law in my early years, obviously, as all junior lawyers know, but employment law, workplace relations, and industrial relations have always been the area that I've focused on for basically the bulk of my career.
Excellent. That's been an amazing journey. I guess the way I look at it is you've actually gone through your journey, probably not by design, but maybe, you know, the way it panned out for you was actually excellent because you started from the ground up, from the way I see it, you know, because, you know, industrial relations and the unions is where really the rubber meets the road
Yeah.
when it comes to employment law, isn't it? So I think you having an understanding of that environment and also your legal background and working in the legal firm, maybe also the business development and sales, as you put it, initially in your career help as well. So I want to sort of talk to you a little bit about skills and
Yep.
your personal view on skills, the mixture of what you bring to the table. So skills, competencies, your experience, what you gather over the years. How do you see that as that mixture being essential for your work today?
Yeah, I think with any career, but in particular in law, if you just watch shows like Suits or Ally McBeal or The Practice or Law and Order, you
Yeah.
probably get a certain view of what a lawyer does. But it's not just about the ability to be a good orator or a good speaker. It's not just an ability to be intelligent or practical. Like there are quite a lot of facets to being a lawyer, and also different areas of law require different types of skills. In my area of law, employment law, there's a real essence of being practical. So you've got to be able to mesh the law and what's happening with the organization, a company. And sometimes that can be at odds. So you've got to work out a solution, you've got to work a solution. But it's very easy to get caught in just being provided, just be able to verbatim say what the law is, you know, saying that I can memorize legislation, I can memorize cases. To be honest, that's not overly valuable nowadays. That the ability to have knowledge is probably very valuable long time, you know, probably earlier on, but nowadays it's not that valuable just because of the access to information is so much wider. So really the skills that are really important is actually the ability to communicate. That's probably the biggest and best one. And if I think about not just my career, but also in high school, my ability to rote learn, because in high school we did a lot of rote learning, and it's not overly valuable going forward. What was actually more valuable was actually how to problem solve, all those problem solving skills. And for me in particular, I love speaking. So I love public speaking. So I did a lot of debating. I did a lot of drama. I enjoy drama. I enjoy musicals. I've passed that down to my kids as well. They love it too. And so that was sort of formed part of my persona and my skills that I wanted to hone in on and get that better, to the point where I can utilize that to a much more better degree than say some others. And that's not to say that other lawyers in my field don't have those skills. I'm sure that there are, but I've focused my skills on that ability to communicate and in different forms, not just
Yeah.
like this in a podcast or not one-on-one, but also on a stage in a conference in front of 1,000 people, 2,000, 3,000 people. It doesn't really matter. It's essentially the essence of it is still the same. And then practically being able to mesh it all together. Those are probably the two biggest ones.
Excellent. Yeah, yeah. I think you're right there. You hit the nail on the head. It's really about how you sort of, I believe, how do you adjust your communication level to the different audiences that you're engaging with, you know? And I believe that's why you call your podcast the HR Engage. It's really about engagement and how you sort of get to their level, you know?
It's a very good point, Jay. I think we do a lot of work with manufacturing. We do a lot of work with local government, as I said. We do a lot of work with NDIS, do a lot of work with health and professional services. Each of those areas, each of those industries probably require a slightly different communication style
Yeah.
and a slightly different way of looking at it practically as well. So you've got to be able to assess that, um, And that takes a bit of time and experience. Don't get me wrong. Like that takes some time and experience. But if you're able to put that together, you'll get much better feedback from people you're working with and your clients. And that's and the essence really comes down to those two things: communication and be able to practically mesh it all together.
That's right. That's right. So you talk about the people you engage with. I believe a lot of human resources
Yep.
personnel, people in that environment. How do you see the sort of the landscape in the human resources employment environment changing, particularly with the new legislation that's hit us in 2024? So how do you see the landscape?
It's going to be a difficult one and has been a difficult one for some time. Human resources teams we work very closely with. I work very closely with, and I give back with the HR Engage podcast, as I've said. But there's some big challenges going forward. So if we just take the law, for example, there's just so many legal changes. You've got right to disconnect, you've got wage theft, you have psychosocial risk and hazards. There's change around sexual harassment, contracts and subcontracting, even potentially even change around the way you engage employees, right? There's pay transparency. There's just so enterprise bargaining, so many.
Mm.
For some industries that you're working in, a little bit easier to discern what is a priority. Yeah. But if you actually think about it, a lot of proactive steps can be taken. So let's say obligations around health and safety, obligations around whether a dismissal is unfair. Like they basically require procedural fairness. Okay. I know it's not exactly that, but generally procedural fairness. As long as you get that procedure right, that does actually mitigate a lot of risk and liability. But to do that, not only do you have to know about that, as in the HR team needs to know about it, not only do you have to communicate that to your managers, both up and down the levels, whether executive level or it's the team leader on the ground, you need to be able to communicate why it's important that they follow a process, follow a policy, how to essentially avoid, say, a general protections claim, whether he, personally or individually sued. That's quite a difficult task. So
Exactly.
that's just the legal part. But if you actually look at where a lot of these problems are coming from, it's coming from a lot of change. So change in particular around recruitment and retention. So that those are still problems, like general problems. And then there's also this issue around, which has also caused some other issues, but there's also technology as well, which is playing a part. So we're now going to see a lot more offshoring, and we're going to see a lot more investment in technology that's outside the traditional realms, and traditional industries also struggling with that too. So HR having to essentially navigate new laws, and there's also some pretty archaic laws and weird laws, Jay. Like if you try to explain to someone in Europe or America legislation around general protections, it is odd. It
Yes.
is odd, So there are differences and nuances that they cannot necessarily understand in other areas. So that's probably the issues that you probably see, Jay.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting landscape because you talk about change, and you talk about organizations or businesses have to sort of educate up and down the channel,
Yep.
how to navigate this change, particularly from a point of view of contracts, and you talk about retention, recruitment. How do you bring people on board? That's true. I agree with you. Businesses still have to operate. You can't stop your business and say, okay, well, we have to take stock of all these legal changes now, so we'll stop operating and we will sort of adjust everything and then restart. By the time you do that, your competition is ahead of you. So I guess my question next would be, in light of what you just said with the changes in legislation that we are aware of, how do you see businesses navigating these changes? The smart businesses, you talk about offshoring, you talk about AI, well, you didn't actually mention AI, but you talk about technology, but I'm reading into that, you know, the opportunities in AI and automation and all that stuff. So how do you see that in your practice on a daily basis? Are the HR um, um, fraternity looking into that?
Definitely.
Okay.
This is an area where there's gonna be a lot of change the next 5, 10, 15, 2 years. It's the thing about human resources, the thing about HR and employment law is that, yes, we have a lot of change. So in some respects, there is a little bit of reset for some areas, yeah, for some
Mm-hmm.
areas. But the interesting part is that where businesses are really going to get unstuck is if they actually don't do anything. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and I've done a lot for the last 3 years. I actually did a bit of a review on the last 3 years of matters that I've worked on.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that a lot of them can come down to a situation where a manager didn't have a difficult conversation with an employee. Yeah. And because of that, it's led to an issue, whether it's harassment claim or bullying claim, unfair dismissal claim. Now, of course, you're still going to have the situations where you can't prevent that, but I think a lot of them would have been prevented.
Yeah.
Or at least the liability and risk mitigated. So I think that's the first point I want to get across, is that the issue of not doing anything, right? Where you could get away with it for a while, at some point it does become a problem and probably festers into a much bigger problem. So if you look at the landscape we're currently in, it's a good time right now, whilst everyone is essentially needing to make some changes, to actually be proactive about it right now. Because the pitch to your board or the pitch to your executive team is a much more easier pitch when essentially everyone else is also having to deal with it. Yeah. So that's probably the second point I want to get across, is that it's time to do it now. The third one I want to get across is building capability. So that's an important part.
Okay.
You need to be able to build capability in your leadership team. You need to be able to build capability in your HR team. And the way you do that is through, say, management training, for example, some stuff that I do. I do workshops, for example, for a lot of my clients to build that capability, get it really practical so they know why they're doing it, okay, why it's important. So those are types of things that can really help. And then, of course, your hygiene issues. Yeah, review your contracts, review your policies, get that right, because that's a platform to being more proactive.
Does this situation also bring about some opportunities that, businesses could think out of the box? And currently in Australia, when you engage personnel or head staff, it will
Yeah.
be either through a employment contract, full-time, permanent, contractor agreement, or casual workers, right? So that whole contract space is changing because of the um, uh, definition between casual labor and non-casual labor and all that stuff. So do you see opportunities where organization can actually think out of the box in terms of how they engage with, I'm not going to use the word personnel, but workforce, with the workforce?
I think it's already happening, and it
Yes.
needs to happen. If you look at some industries, they are crying out for people. Engineers are probably one area. Even accountants. Even sort of marketing. Like, there's so many
Everywhere.
areas.
Doctors, for instance, it's also
Doctors.
but it's
Yeah.
even worse now. Yeah.
And look, and some of them, it's going to be difficult to, maybe migration might play a part, those types of things. I think there is also an avenue for different types of thinking. So potentially, engaging in consultants, engaging in external project managers, engaging in potentially some sort of labor hire, offshoring. There are definitely opportunities there. And no doubt there's been also investment in technology, investment, acquiring different types of businesses to fill some holes. Like there are definitely businesses that are already doing that. They're thinking outside the box. There are also people that are maybe thinking about it, but haven't done anything just yet. And they really need to start thinking, okay, well, we can't just be hiring staff or hiring employees. Maybe there are other options as well out there.
I think this brings back to the point that you made earlier on, that is, it's about time. It's about the timeliness of your sort of intervention. I think
Yep.
you said it's really important that now people should look at, people meaning businesses should be looking at what they have in terms of policies, procedures, contracts, but also the hygiene factor of how they engage with the workforce. And if you don't do anything as a business, I think that's where the risks are emerging. There are other businesses that are doing lots of stuff. You mentioned using contract workers, using offshore companies to help them, even themselves. I know so many organizations that are setting themselves up in other countries where
Yes. Yes.
legislative framework is easier to deal with, and economies of scales make things possible. But there also the whole concept of utilizing technology. A lot of jobs we know are going to be at stake in the next, I would say, 5 to 6 years.
Yep.
I can already see some drops in companies looking for certain skills, but interestingly, there's an increase in jobs where companies are looking for other skills. So that's where the talent environment or the talent landscape is changing.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Jay. There's definitely a correlation between the issues that we have generally in the workforce. And of course, I know there is the COVID argument. Like, we're definitely still feeling the hangovers, especially in different states. Certain states in Australia are still feeling that hangover from COVID. But we've had a bit of an issue with recruitment and retention for quite a while, right? It's quite a while. And, there is definitely a lot of employees that are thinking of working in a different way, whether it's flexible work hours, whether it's gig economy. Like there's it's quite a lot of change in that space, and the law is trying to keep up. It doesn't, but it's trying to keep up. And maybe the cases probably play a little bit more a part in actually telling us what would be best practice. Yes, but I think organizations like yours, Jay, with MaxStaff, I think will play a bigger part going forward. Organizations that bigger and small organizations who have a hole in some sort of technical field or area that they wish to fill, but don't necessarily want to just go down a straight labor hire or consultant type short-term engagement. It could be from longer term engagement or more of a project type engagement. I think that is an interesting path that the workforce is going to go down going forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think there will be a one size fits all type of workforce. You talk about the gig economy, and to be honest with you, 75% of people I meet these days would say they've got a side hustle. Work somewhere else, they do something else. Whether the employers know about it or not is a different matter.
Yes.
But if you talk to them and you're having a coffee or a beer after work, that's what they talk about.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I think businesses need to sort of acknowledge that. The one size fits all approach is, especially post COVID, is out the window. There's legal framework. Yes, agreed. We all need to operate within the legal framework.
Yes.
But I think you made the point that if you don't do anything now as a business, and if you're not moving ahead, you don't do anything now, that's the biggest risk. And what we do, our mantra is execution. So whatever we whatever hoops we need to go through, whatever hurdles we have to go through to actually solve the problem of execution using staffing and talent, we will do it for our customers. So that comes in different shapes and sizes, different types of engagement. But at the end of the day, we just get the job done. That's what it's about.
I think you're right, Jay, because so I'll take it in two contexts, right? So in courts or commissions, right? If an employer essentially pleads ignorance or has ignored the issue, let's say it's a sexual harassment claim, and there's a claim that's been filed in the commission, and nothing has been done, or very little has been done in terms of response to the claim. Yeah. Okay. No investigation, nothing. And it's essentially like ignoring it. Just ignore it so it all goes away. Now, the simple question that a commissioner would ask is, so what did you do? It's not what you're doing now, because yes, it's great that this is never going to happen again, putting some training in place. No, but what did you do
at the time?
Yeah. And I think that goes the same. And just that one simple question, you scratch the surface and it all falls apart.
Yeah.
I think it's the same when it comes to human resources and workforces going forward too. It's okay to rue the issues around, we can't really place anyone, or we can't retain people as we'd love to, and everything else. I suppose the question comes down then is, so what have you done?
That's right.
And again, this could just come from any consultant or coach or whatever, but what have you done? There's a lot of people out there. I think about some really famous YouTubers or whatever, Gary Vee and all those guys talking about get a side hustle and, work all these. Okay, great. People are listening to them. They're listening to them and going, hey, I would like to do a side hustle. Yeah. It's easier for me to make a little bit more money as opposed to getting a wage rise, right? Okay. A little bit more money on the sides doing whatever side hustle. And there's obviously that side obviously has some darker components. I'm not going to say exactly what those are, but what those dark components are too.
Yeah.
But like even the brighter ones, which is, have a business on the side.
Yeah.
That could lead to issues down the track as well. So I think there is this proactive approach that's required. I think organizations that are just being reactive, especially with HR teams, and I love HR teams, but HR teams who just love the firefighting, that's great. But you do need to have a bit more strategy and a bit more of a plan. I don't think you can survive anymore. And have a flourishing growth or flourishing workforce without some sort of strategic plan around it.
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, proactivity or proactiveness is really where it sits. If you're reactive and you run your practice or your business with respect to, okay, we've got our set procedures, the business plays out, now we've got a case, how do we deal with it? That's being reactive. I would say in the change of landscape, skill shortages, you put all that into the mix, I don't think this will create an environment of success 2025 going forward. What I see as success going forward with organizations like yourself, Jonathan, where you're working, is about being proactive, engaging with human resources, engaging with businesses, understanding the current situation, the landscape. The gig economy, that's not going to disappear. Working from home, that will not disappear. A lot of organizations are mandating people coming back to work, but what effect does it have on employee morale, employee engagement? Again, when you sit down and have coffee and beers with people, everybody's complaining, oh, now I got to go back to work 5 days a week. Well, that was the case before COVID. It's not the case now. But at the end of the day, what we are paying people for is we are paying people for outcomes, productivity.
Yeah.
So if these people are not engaging with us because of, change, then we have, I believe strongly, organizations have to do something about it. So be proactive, and yeah, manage it so that it's, solving the problems of 2025 and beyond, not the problems of the challenges of 2020. That's what it is.
I see both sides of the coin.
Yes.
I do, especially coming from my training, my background, which was, you would work in the office and you would work, your period of time and you'd work, pretty long hours. And look, and don't get me wrong, Jay, I still do. I still do
Yes.
work long hours. Don't get me wrong. But I think there is definitely a generation coming through, or even a couple of generations coming through, that have a bit of a change mindset
Yeah.
about this from the start. So not changing it. And there's definitely people around my age as well, and just generation before and generation above me, who also have a bit of a different thinking around the workplace. None of it's right or wrong. In my view, none of it's right or wrong. I think, but from an employer perspective and from a HR perspective in particular, there needs to be the ability to be flexible with all that. So that whole, as you said, one size doesn't fit all. The
Yeah.
problem with that, it does get convoluted and complicated. There's no doubt about that. To manage all those moving parts is much more difficult. So having a one size fits all is actually much easier to manage. It is. It absolutely is. But I don't think organizations, especially organizations that sort of go past that, past a certain level, can really have a one size fits all. I think it's a bit of a struggle.
I
And,
think,
and I think as small businesses, I think for small businesses, it's actually going to be their almost like their superpower, where they
yes.
can utilize that as a
Yeah.
competitive advantage.
Well, we used to call it being agile, but I think it's beyond that. I think engaging with lawyers like yourself, proactive lawyers that who understand the reality of business, but also have their foot well on the ground when it comes to the legal aspect of things.
Mm.
It's essential. If I was restarting now in 2025 and setting up a business for success, I would be engaging with a lawyer like yourself on a retainer basis and make sure that they are there by my side. So we design the landscape together from a HR point of view. That's what I would be doing.
There's some really great businesses out there, Jay, that I think who are starting to show in different ways that leading their workforce through different ways, especially for the HR team, is paying some dividends. But also, I would be mindful of also saying, and go back to that whole element of, it's not one size fits all. Just because it works with that company, say technology company, doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean it's going to work for an engineering company. Okay, it may or may not. But I think the thing is, it's worth exploring. It's worth exploring those different options and seeing where that lands. And I think that is a part that HR can play going forward, is exploring these different opportunities, different types of workforces, different types of employment models, and seeing what may work for their business.
Excellent, excellent. We could sit around and talk this for hours and hours and hours, Jonathan. I can see how passionate you are about this sort of, junction between law and human resources and business. The three together is essentially your passion, isn't it? I can see that beaming through. Your final words?
I think my final words would be that it's actually really easy to ignore problems and not do anything. Essentially ignore these new laws, legislation, obligations. It's actually relatively easy to do so, especially if you're super busy. But I would very much say, please don't do that. Read if you can, get some education, come to some of my workshops, read some articles on LinkedIn, get a little bit abreast of it, and then actually start putting some actions in place. Okay, get some help, of course, but get some action steps in place. I think that is where HR need to be at. They need to start trying a few different things and seeing what models might work for them and their workplace, and try it and pitch that to whoever they need to pitch that to, whether it's a board or an executive team. I think that's the important part. And I think in terms of skills, and I think this goes for everyone, communication, I think, is going to be a key factor. The ability to communicate and how you communicate. And I think the second part is going to be how you practically mesh whatever your expertise is with the situation that you're dealing with, or business that you're dealing with, or industry you're dealing with. I think that's going to be two big skills going forward.
Fabulous. Thank you, Jonathan, for being part of the Talent Channel. Appreciate your time. Take care.
Great to be number 2 here. So I'm glad for that too, Jay.
Cheers.
Thanks.